Peace and greetings. Presenting the Network of Awareness podcast radio station, providing in-depth information on society and culture in America and abroad, bringing you truth messages of inspiration, keen insight, reputable interviews, and so much more. So now, for the truth you've been waiting for, your host of the Network of Awareness podcast, ORRA, the informationalist.
All right, peace and greetings, people. Got Billy Irizarry from the Golden Apple podcast, along with the Network of Awareness podcast and TV. And today, I decided to link up with Billy Izzy because we're going to do a series on narcissism. And it's going to be a series that's going to be going out on social media, on eventually Network of Awareness TV, and also the audios of these series will be on the Golden Apple podcast as well as the Network of Awareness podcast. So welcome to Billy Irizarry, brother. So Billy, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Bro, as you know, I'm somebody who has recently got out of a very toxic relationship with a woman who was, I would literally call her a bona fide expert narcissist. And narcissism is a big problem, you know, and it's something that I really experienced in a personal relationship like I did now, maybe in some friendships now that I'm looking back on it. But it seems to be a serious issue. And I've been following a couple of clinical psychologists, one in particular on Med Circle. If you guys haven't checked out Med Circle on YouTube, very, very good show. They have a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Ramadi. And this woman is phenomenal in the way she breaks down narcissism, and she's just an expert at it. So I did a lot of research with that. And I also did some further research beyond that. And it was just blowing my mind, man, because narcissism is a big problem in society today. Because in my opinion, and from my perspective, I just see the world being engineered socially to have more narcissists sprout up, especially in the younger generations. And then, of course, even in our generations and older. So let's start talking about what is narcissism. So, Billy, what is narcissism to you? And then, of course, we'll get the definition out there.
Okay, so just for beginners, I'm going to take this from a layman's standpoint, because I didn't start talking about narcissism until the past couple of years. And I did not even do the in-depth research that you did. I kind of started with, what does the word nomenclature come from? And Narcissus was a Greek god that fell in love with his own image. And he rejected all advances onto him. And it got so bad that he fell in love with his reflection and in a pool of water, and stayed staring at it for the remainder of his life. I think that by itself, just as a story of, let's just say he's the preeminent narcissist, is a good way to put it, because so that somehow we relate it to the actual meaning of the word, how it's demonstrated. But I still found it very difficult to identify, because the narcissistic people in my life were also very close to me and meant a lot to me, or were in positions of power. So it was hard to, for me personally, when I was wrapped up in a job or my work, that my well-being in terms of my finances and maintaining a household rely on this job that I have, how I bring home my money. And I'm dealing with a narcissist that's an owner of this business, and how the games that they play is very troubling. So I've got my obligation in one hand and my self-preservation in the other. It's very difficult to balance.
Well, for the people that are viewing this for this video, Narcissism is an excessive interest, and this is coming off of Google, excessive interest or admiration of oneself and one's physical appearance. Narcissism is selfishness involving a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, which we're going to get deep into, and a need for admiration as characterizing a personality type. Now, I can tell you that from my personal experience in this very toxic relationship that I was in for a little bit less than a year, when it comes to a narcissist, like their level of empathy doesn't even exist. And that's one of the biggest problems with a narcissist is because they're an abuser. They're like a bully. And what they're trying to do is they want to control the narrative of your relationship. And matter of fact, not only do they create the narrative for the relationship, but they constantly are altering it to fit what they want you to believe. Because if you're somebody like myself, who I like to think I'm somewhat intelligent, you start to pick up on these things. You start to see these, of course, we call them red flags in relationships, but it's a lot deeper than a red flag when it comes to a narcissist in a relationship, because their behavior is not something that you could just walk away from. It goes a lot deeper than that, because when you start questioning them, they get very irate. They get very hostile. They go into these temper tantrums, and then they start utilizing this guilt trip type of dialogue with you, making you think that you're going crazy, that you're the abuser by even questioning them. My particular narcissist that I was in a relationship with recently, one of her biggest problems was she talks over me. I mean, she would talk over me like all the time. And it started becoming somewhat annoying to where I had to be like, hey, do you ever shut up? Do you know how to stay quiet? Because if adults are talking, there has to be a respectable dialogue where somebody stays quiet and the other person listens and vice versa. But you would think that when you get to a certain age, especially in the relationship I was in, where we both were in our, I would say, early to mid 40s, you would think that a person by that time has figured that out. But with a narcissist, they really don't care, because it's all about control. And they're just going to continue to manipulate to the point where you, as the one that's being abused, you start thinking like, am I going crazy here? Am I in the twilight zone? Like, what is actually happening? Now, luckily for me, Billy, two things that helped me out in getting out of this relationship. Matter of fact, three things. One, people like you, my support system, right? My closest friends that are my support system. So for those that are listening, if you are experiencing something like this, which we will describe, go to your support system immediately. Like if it's a life or death situation, because technically it is emotionally and mentally for your well-being. It is a life and death situation. Take it very seriously. So the one thing was my support system. I turned to my support system, which I was abandoning for quite some time. I really wasn't telling them everything that was going on. The second thing for me, and this is where a lot of people are not as fortunate as myself. My relationship started long distance. She was in a whole nother state. Also, what helped me was the fact that I was able to see certain things and have reactions from other people that were not directly associated, but knew of our relationship, and things transpired for me to start seeing certain behavioral patterns that just wasn't adding up. Unfortunately, with other people, unlike myself, where they're in it, they're seeing that person every day. They're in a serious relationship, they're in marriages, but it's not long distance. They're living with this person. So that's where I lucked out, because I wasn't around this person every day. So I wasn't, my level of intimacy wasn't being developed directly. It was being developed like how you and I are talking now. But with all that being said, One thing that narcissism is, it's very toxic, right? Would you agree?
Toxicity, I think, is like a byproduct and a result, and is the feeling that you're left with of being pulled to and fro. Just so you know, I'm taking notes as you're talking, just as a remind myself, because you're correlating with a relationship, I'm correlating with a work environment, but it's the same feeling that came out of it. So when you're talking about that person has a temper, and then they would, then change their behavior for you to pity them. Those are two very extreme behaviors, which fits right in with passive aggression. Passive aggression, in degree, but those are two extremes. And I can recall, the difference of being yelled at or having arguments, and then, being then asked to pity, let's say the owner for a situation, and compel me to offer more of my time and, my life force and energy to inject into a certain situation, which was their plan all along, which was to compel you, like you said, to follow their narrative. And they'd almost do that by any means necessary,
Absolutely.
So, that being said, what are the byproducts of the feelings? The toxicity is the feelings of being in prison, like you have no options, there's no way out, or that you have no life without this person. Like for me, it was like, man, I'm such a piece of crap. I can't even find another job. If I can't do this job, then who's going to hire me? Which if somebody else on the outside and I was expressing that to them, they'd be like, what are you talking about? You're valuable. You're a contributor. You're a hard worker. Anybody would be happy to hire you. But within myself, and this is an internal dialogue as well. When we're experiencing these abuses, this is not something we're coming home and bringing to our spouses, or I'm talking about my friends. This is like something that's happening inside, something I'm experiencing, and then I'm taking and carrying with me everywhere I go, and not necessarily getting help for, because in those moments, I didn't realize I needed help from that. I think that's another situation people find themselves in if they're dealing with a narcissist is, they're empathic. Their empathicness is being taken advantage of, and they're finding themselves kind of dealing with it unto themselves, which
absolutely
probably like the worst thing you could do is deal with that, because a lot of time can pass before you realize, oh, I've been being abused this whole time. And then now that I recognize that I'm being abused, it's up to me to resolve it. I'm the one picking up the mess. They don't suffer the way I suffer.
Of course. And you know why they don't suffer? Now, spiritually, they're suffering. Let's get that out there. Spiritually, they're suffering. Whether they're going to realize it or not, they're suffering. Because if you're living your life like that, a life like that is a life of suffering. To me, it's a pathetic life. It's a life it's not worth anything, because you're just a destroyer of other people's lives. Point an example. Here are some of the symptoms of a narcissistic personality disorder or type, because narcissistic personality disorder and narcissistic people are two different things. There's people that have narcissistic personality disorder, and there's people that are just narcissistic. And I learned that from Dr. Ramadi. It's two different things, because narcissistic personality disorder is an actual clinical disorder that somebody can be diagnosed with. Now, the person that I'm was in a relationship with, they're just a narcissistic person because they have a lot of these personality traits based on their upbringing and certain events on how they dealt with them throughout their life. But here's some of the signs. And it's grandiose sense of self-importance. And this reminds me of that gentleman that I told you I used to follow his podcast and his platform. He exhibited a lot of this. And I kind of sensed it after I noticed he built his platform up to a lot of notoriety, and a lot of people started following him, and I saw his ego get super inflated, as it is present day. So he definitely was one of these people with grandiose sense of self-importance. The other one is lives in a fantasy world that supports their delusions of grandeur. So there's a lot of people like this in the world today that they've created this bubble of false illusions, and they live in them thinking that they're real, and they want everybody else to think they're real, when most people would be like, you're bugging. You are really a crazy person. But they do it in a way where you won't even know it. The other one is needs constant praise and admiration. That's why you'll see with social media is a breeding ground for the narcissist, right? Because, and like Dr. Ramadi explained, where people are wanting likes, they want to grow their platforms. And, I had to think about, well, am I a narcissist? Because I want to grow my podcast. So I'm using social media to do that. It's a big difference though. See, my purpose is to use social media as an avenue to generate, awareness, but not for the sake of wanting to be noticed. Because I rather people follow my platform than follow me. I really don't want people giving me attention. I want them giving the information attention. Big difference. Where a lot of people on social media be like, oh, the girl start opening up her shirt and showing her cleavage, or the guy's going to show his buff body for the purpose of saying, look at me, look at how sexy I am. And for other reasons too. So it's very narcissistic to just want a lot of praise and attention, right? Matter of fact, I used to see my sister's friend, who's older, my sister's older than me by 10 years. I would see her friend who was a beautiful woman. I mean, gorgeous woman, but constantly on Facebook posting pictures so that everybody be like, ooh, oh, mommy, you look so good and beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Another one is a sense of entitlement. And that's something that I see a lot of, especially with that platform that I used to follow with that man. It's the sense of entitlement that they give themselves. It's nobody gave it to them. They give it to themselves. The other one is exploits others without guilt or shame. And you already know that I've experienced that exploitation in many, many ways just in the past 3 or 4 months. And that's a big problem because if you see somebody that's like that exploits others without guilt or shame, the reason there is no guilt or shame because there is no empathy. The other one is frequently demeans, imitates, bullies, or belittles others. And let me tell you something. In my personal, I can't even call it romantic relationship anymore because there really was very little romance. But in my personal relationship with the woman that I was married to, boy, when you want to talk about abuse, and you know me, Billy, I'm the type of person that I'm not really going to take abuse from somebody directly. But this was an abuse that I didn't even realize I was experiencing until I would come to you and start seeking counsel because you are a life coach. So it's really good to have a friend that I love dearly that is a life coach. So I could be like, hey, what do you think about this? And then you started telling me like, hey, there's something rotten in Denmark. Something smells rotten in Denmark. And we need to find the source. We need to find the source of this decrepit, rotten behavior, where it's coming from. And, something else that they do that I learned from Dr. Ramadi is that they like to triangulate. And triangulation means that they'll pin people against each other. They'll take one person and pin them against them. And I saw her do that in her family. I saw her do that on social media. I saw her do that on the network we was on. And then, of course, she brought me into her drama of triangulation. Okay. So that's the key.
Those are great points. And I'm so glad that you're giving Dr. Ramadi, the credit for that instruction so that people understand we're not inventing this. Another side of this, something you mentioned earlier, about that they live in some fantasy world supported by illusions of grandeur. So everything else that came after that, what you said about the need for constant praise, sense of entitlement, how we become, let's say, I'm going to say victimized by them in a sense, in a way, is that we have to be in touch with our own illusions. Some people might look at that person as a good person, not recognizing the type of abuse that they're subjecting themselves to. Something that, I heard from one of my mentors, Michael Tessarian, was that we will only allow other people to abuse us up to the point that we're abusing ourselves. Mm. So a lot of this is introspection and knowing yourself. And the way I I relate it is that, let's say a person that has a constant need for praise and admiration, is that some people do anything for praise and admiration in the way of their esteem. So, it's okay that you want to be praised by your partner, let's say, or by people close to you, but you're also reciprocating that. So how I say is that it's self-validation supported by, balanced relationships, meaning, that if you have to be honest with somebody, you can be honest with them. And if you're praising them, you're praising them because, they're demonstrating, a quality that resonates with you, that you find, so admirable that you just want to say, wow, that's great. I love what you did, or, hey, you know what? You're glowing today.
Our friendship is very much like that for the past, 8
years.
Yeah. But our friendship has been exactly like that.
Yeah. And then we're not afraid to say, hey, you know what? You're not looking so good. What's going on? Or, a version of the truth, because we're trying to figure out, okay, how come I'm not doing my best? How come I don't feel my best? What is not? So then we can deconstruct it. But sticking with the narcissist is, everything else that came afterwards, really has nothing to do with us personally, that we didn't cause that. It has a lot to do with the behavior that we commit, not understanding, what's in our midst and how we're being affected by them first. This is why we're going through this. We want people to understand this is the behavior to look for. Now, some of this doesn't necessarily mean by itself that person is a narcissist. It's evidence of the narcissism. And when you put it all together, let's say by the time you get to the point where that person is triangulating other people, to be against you or in conflict with each other, by then, if you're not seeing that, then you're still not seeing what's happening to you. And that triangulation that happened on the job, I got lied to behind my back. I got told one thing in my face and then heard something else from somebody else. And a lot of times it wasn't when it was going on. It was like way after the fact when I was like, oh, that's not what I heard. That's not what he said. And then that's what she said. That's what I was told that she said and did. And then come to find out that it was the opposite that was true. And then by then the damage was done. I already had the feelings of not being good enough. I already had the feelings of, that I didn't do my job. I had the feelings of that, that I wasn't worth, the ink that was on the end of my pen. And that was also happening with myself, because if I had self-worth, then my esteem wouldn't have been based on what they were saying and doing. And eventually what ended up happening was that I had had enough, and I started to rebuild my confidence, and I left that environment. I left the job for good and was able to find, other ways of rebuilding my esteem and not permit that to happen to me anymore.
It's interesting how, I just left this relationship, but, something that Dr. Ramani had explained is that where the narcissist in a relationship will make you start questioning yourself to where you feel like you're not good enough for that person. Mm-hmm. And I remember that when I was in the process of letting this individual go and just, dumping them and getting them out of my life, one of the first things I had wrote before even the breakup was like, it's too bad that I wasn't good enough for you, that I wasn't enough. But the reality was that I was more than enough. It's just that she wasn't good enough for me. And I think that what my biggest problem, which I know is my biggest problem, was setting a boundary for this relationship. I didn't set any boundaries. And that's something that I'm now working on just in my life in general, because I'm poor at setting boundaries. And if you're somebody that's poor at setting boundaries, I definitely suggest to be very careful in getting in relationships, because you can become a victim like I was. And my biggest problem of why I was able to be manipulated in the fashion in which I was manipulated, because, I like to think myself as a person who's very aware. The problem is that I was a man that was single for 10 years. So when I got into this relationship with this woman, I created a false fantasy or a fantasy that when I did get with her and establish a relationship, I'm thinking, this is it. This is the one. I waited all this time for this situation. And that was the fantasy that I was living in, not realizing that, hey, this is just another woman that you need to get to know and experience and take the ride and see what happens, but not put all your eggs in the basket and say, hey, this is it. This is going to be my wife and I'm going to live happily ever after. But because I stayed single so long and I thought I was ready, I thought that this was a blessing in disguise. Like this is what the Most High was sending to me to say, hey, now it's time. Like you found the one. And that was my fault. I approached that very frivolously. I was very frivolous. It was silly. It was just silly of my approach. And it wasn't very mature of me. And of course, I had to learn the hard way. I'm going to read 4 types of narcissism. So actually 5. So these are experts work with 5 main types of narcissism. One is overt, covert, communal, antagonistic, and malignant narcissism. All right. Now, one thing that I found interesting is that can a narcissist be a good person? It says the kind of narcissist sees themselves as a good person. Often they appear steady and good-natured. They are popular and well thought of. The trouble arises once more is asked of them and then they want to give. And that is so true within the dynamic of the relationship that I was in, was because when the relationship required more effort is when the narcissistic behavior really went into overdrive. But the reality is too, is that with a narcissist, Billy, is that and I learned this from Dr. Ramadi and Med Circle, is that the moment they get with you, and I'm talking about not even in the relationship, this is when you're just talking. This is when you're just getting to know each other. This is when you're on the friend level, associate level. They already have intentions on destroying you. They already have intentions on bringing you down from the very beginning. But what they do, as what was done with me, is they're going to show you the best version of what they could be for the purposes of manipulation. So in my situation, this person was very generous, very giving, very loving, very caring, and showed empathy, but it wasn't empathy that was genuine and sincere, that was coming from the heart. It was perpetrated empathy, like it's almost like a CIA agent. A CIA agent is going to do everything to get their target. They're going to win them over. An undercover cop, right, that's infiltrating the mob, like Donnie Brasco. Donnie Brasco, that was played by Johnny Depp, he had to get good in with the mob. And what did he do? He got in good with one of the mob members and made that mob member trust him, love him, think of him as a brother. But in the whole time, the purpose that Donnie Brasco was even there was to bring down that whole entire criminal organization. And I just use that as an example because that's what a narcissist does. They're there to infiltrate and get everything they can get out of you and literally suck the life out of you. And they don't even have an inclination or they don't even have a thought of empathy. Like they don't care how much you're suffering. I'll go even further from my personal experience. I believe that the narcissist takes great pleasure in seeing your demise and knowing that they're responsible for it. And that's what makes the narcissist so disgusting to the person that's being abused, because the behavior is like, really? I'm showing you all this love and empathy and true admiration, and this is what you're doing to me. Problem is that most people that even get to that level that I got to, they're not getting to that level in a 6-month period like I did. They're getting to that level 5, 10, 15 years from now. And guess what? By the time they get there, they're already a shell, like Dr. Ramadi said, of themselves. They don't even know who they are no more.
And that part of giving up of one's identity is however process it takes, fast or slow, is the most heartbreaking part of it, is that they lost touch with their own self-esteem and their own sense of self-worth. So going back to the very beginning, because we're trying to give people the insight to how do they prevent this, or how do they interrupt what's going on. And I really do think it's an internal battle. And I did make a couple of notes about them that we can expound upon in another show. First of all, when we say boundaries, we're not talking about walls to hide behind. We're talking about different moving lines that are fluid in terms of you're not just sticking to one boundary and one belief, but a value that you have. So, for example, that this happened very quickly to you. Let's say you had prolonged what I refer to as rites of passage, then some of these other evidences would have made themselves apparent. So the truth about our reality as human beings is that everybody has a balance of amazing and beautiful things about them and things that are less than stellar. So how do you really know somebody? In the Matrix, there's a scene with Neo where he says, why don't you just tell me why don't you just ask me who I am? He says, you don't know someone until you truly know someone until you fight them. And so how does somebody hold up in an argument or against adversity if everything is roses and peaches and sweet stuff and you haven't had a chance to experience that? Then you know that you don't really know that person just yet. You just know that you like what you see and how you feel, what you're experiencing. The more time goes on, as somebody exposes the other sides of them, you can start to see their flaws. And that's all they are, is flaws. We all are flawed beings, right? And, giving yourself the opportunity to test that person against their own flaws to see if you can tolerate that behavior. In this particular case, my case in the workplace, and your case in this relationship, the behavior was intolerable, and there was nothing else to discuss. There was nothing else to decide. It was very, very obvious what should be done. But as you said before, that sometimes people, they get caught up in it, and it carries on for years and years. And so, the whole thing of, having boundaries, right, establishing rites of passage, values, a value could be saying no, even though there's no evidence to why you should say no. No is a very powerful thing to say and do. Let's say something seems, all the boxes are checked and it should be a yes. Does that mean that you should or be compelled to have to do it just because you're inertia to, because of your feelings? Sometimes you can say, I can wait. Let's spend more time, or let me look at this closer. Let me let a little bit of time pass to see if something else doesn't become revealed to make me make a better decision about this or that regarding a person. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying no. We don't always have to just go with the flow. Sometimes we have to redirect the direction of our life so it's more in line with our values. And then, how do we deal with our own illusions? There's definitely things, these beliefs that we have about this image of how we see our life being lived. Is that the life that you're actually living? Or is that just something you believe is the place you want to be and not the place that you're at? And that has a lot to also do with, falling into these little traps that are set with narcissists.
I agree. Something I heard not too long ago was, just because you break up with somebody or somebody completely does you dirty in a relationship doesn't make you just start loving them instantly. You're still going to love that person even though they cheated on you, or they hit you, or lied to you, or did whatever they did, anything that was negative they did. You just can't turn off the switch and start loving them. And when I heard that made so much sense, because even though I knew that this woman that I was with was a toxic individual, and I finally understood it for what it was, I couldn't just shut off everything that I felt right then and there just because I finally realized that this person didn't give a crap about me. And I think that that's a major challenge for a person dealing with a narcissist, even in the work environment, even if they've developed a very high level of respect for this person or any type of relationship period, to be honest with you, because normally they give you such a great version of what they could be that you kind of, I don't know if I wouldn't say fall in love, but you just kind of get entangled with that experience and you hold on to that. And you hold on to it so much so that while they're showing you something completely different after the fact, you're still holding on to them like, hey, why is this person acting like this? Because they're really like this. But they're not. That was just a representative. That was just something they did to get you into the web of confusion, to the point that by the time you do get confused, you don't even know what's going on because you're like, what happened to this person? What the hell happened to that nice person that was loving on me or taking care of me or hooking me up with great accounts or giving me great opportunities at the job or whatever the case may be? You're like, what happened? It's almost like the person disappears in a moment's notice. And now you're stuck with this very abusive, toxic, very aggressive, demeaning type of person that is like belittling you and pretty much telling you that you're not worth anything. And then the moment, see what I've noticed too, is the moment you start realizing your worth and you realize that you have to get out, they're going to go right back to that representative. It's like they switch right back. And what was interesting in my situation is that when I was breaking up with my ex-wife was, what was interesting is that she went into hyper kindness mode and actually started revealing her flaws to some degree and saying, I could have did this better and this and blah, blah, blah. And it was like a 3-hour conversation it was so enlightening. And I'm over here like, wow. But in my mind, I know what's happening, but I'm acting like I'm really engaged with her. Like, wow, that was a great conversation. Wow. You really touched on some important things. And she's like, yeah, I did. And and she's thinking in her mind, like, I got him back. I'm getting him back. And in my mind, I'm like, no, bitch. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. I'm just going through the formality of all of this stuff with you in my mind, though. And there was a couple of times where I had to close my eyes just so that I don't give that message away in my facial expressions or in my body language. And I got to tell you that after all that was said, she's thinking, okay, I'm going to get him back because she gave me this level of kindness and understanding in the relationship that she should have gave me a long time ago. And then you know what I said? I said, well, that was really nice. And I really appreciate you understanding. And I think we touched on some great points, but my decision still stands. And the moment I said that, it's like her eyes flared up and she threw her phone. And then she went into I was like, I'm looking at a ceiling, right? Because we're on a FaceTime and I'm looking at a ceiling like, oh, here we go. And I'm like, are you okay? I'm doing the fake caring stuff. I said, are you okay? She's like, yeah, I'm fine. So you're just going to break up with me. You're going to dump me. You're not going to even give me a second chance. You're not going to do this work. And I'm saying to myself, no, no. And then she said, why? And I was like, well, because I love myself more than I love you. And I respect myself. And if I stay with you, then I don't love myself and I don't respect myself. Plain and simple.
And I know somebody else that had to come to the same conclusion that when they were being gaslighted, which is another subsection of...
And we'll get to that on another episode, by the way.
Correct. That's a whole different thing we'll get into. But just to throw the term out there, something for people to become familiar with, is that somebody that I'm very close with went through the same thing and had to come up with the same decision. I'm either choosing myself or I'm choosing this person's word and that relationship. And that's what it came down to. And that person said, I choose myself, and ended it, and then ended it once and for all. And then was like, don't call me, don't talk to me, don't have no contact with me, don't come looking for me, don't want to see you, don't want to be you. And that was it. So at that point, now 7 years had elapsed. Happy for that person that they made that choice and moved on. But there was definitely a lot of that. That behavior you're just talking about is that, listen to my logic. My logic is sound. Everything is good. You should be with me. And I think in an employment situation, even though it may not necessarily follow that particular pattern, it still have that hard feeling of leaving. So another thing we could talk about besides, the gaslighting is, what is the mentality of the victim? Because at this point, a person has to identify that they've been victimized. And what is the victim mentality? It's something else we can go into in another show, because, that by itself, I'm sure, when we start to deconstruct it and then start to realize all these low vibration feelings that we're carrying around and not even aware of them, that allowed us to get into this position in the first place. And something I want to make very clear to anybody that's listening or sees this is that does not, mean you're a bad person or you did something so terribly wrong. If anything, being a good person and being, a wholehearted, open, generous person, which is you being yourself, is what kind of got you lured into that situation. Because sometimes we believe people at their word, and emotion can be imitated, and intention can be hidden. And we tend to just kind of believe what we see and hear at first blush without qualifying. That's why rites of passage or having good discernment, allows you to have the mindset of that emotions are something to protect and are valuable, and that your attention is valuable, and not just to be given freely to anyone, but to also be metered in terms of, what you allow in and what you're giving. Because if it was up to all of us, we'd be these, vulnerable beings running around just giving freely and receiving freely. And so, on what level are we doing that? And again, understanding what the victim mentality is understanding how you can prevent yourself from getting to it, or how to identify that you're in it already, or how to recover from what happened in the past, so that you don't have to be the victim mentality. Take control of your life, take control of your emotions, take control of your thoughts. All that stuff easier said than done, but that's what we're here for, is to show the way, give examples, talk about it, have it out in the open.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said about discernment is so true. And on our next episode, I'm going to read a couple of scriptures from the Bible that are in regards to the narcissist, because there are good scriptures that identify what a narcissist could be in the way how people operate. And one in particular, which we'll go over in another episode, is the harlot, and how the harlot seeks out a man with light, a person with light in them. So we'll get into that. It's kind of like what you put me on to, American Gods, where there is the god called Gilquist, who is this really beautiful melanated woman that looks of African descent. And she's a god that devours men, souls, She literally devours them into her vagina. And if you haven't checked it out, people, watch American Gods. It's a pretty good, interesting TV show about different gods and how people have worshipped these different gods throughout the ages.
Very loaded show. A lot going on there.
A lot going on there. A lot. If you're looking with your spiritual eyes, let's just put that out there. You just don't watch it for entertainment purposes. Because if you do watch it for entertainment purposes, like anything right now on TV, you're not going to really get the value of, because you have to understand something. Hollywood people, and not to digress or whatever, but just on a side note, Hollywood is showing you a lot of truth, but they show it to you in an entertainment form. And that's where a lot of us get confused because we're thinking that this is entertainment. We're thinking that this is just something to watch, to make us laugh, cry, smile, get angry about. But it's so much more deeper than that. There is a message there. And if you're not really looking into the message, then you're not going to really see what the message is because you're too focused on entertainment. So
another part of the message that is what makes this show so loaded is the symbolism. Symbolism is rife in anything having to do with Hollywood, and symbolism is subliminal unless you know what you're looking at. So this is why when we go to discernment, that this is part of it. So discernment is a skill. It's not something we're born with. And that's the right take on that show, because it can be very entertaining, but we're trying to get you to be more aware of what you're seeing.
And symbolism is the first language. I mean, it's the language of our ancestors, and it's now being used against us subliminally to destroy us, to colonize us mentally. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a pretty awesome job at it, if I must say so myself. They're doing a really great job at it. That's why there is a very, very small percentage of people in this world that actually know the truth of what's really going on when they see these things. And the internet has been a great contributor to people being able to expose that without too much censorship. But obviously, like what I'm experiencing, censorship has increased rapidly in the last, matter of fact, in the last 2 years since the pandemic started. Censorship has become so powerful simply because of the science appliance, the science appliance and the way they're trying to keep that lie going to make it sound like it's good.
Yeah, those are all things we could talk about forever.
I know. I'm just mentioning that because, these are things that people need to be aware of. But with all that being said, brothers and sisters, and all those tuning in to the show that are going to be watching this to the end, I want to thank you if you got up to this point. This is just the first installment. This is an introduction. This is an introduction of many, many, many episodes that are to come in regards to narcissism, because it's really that important, people. It's important because most of society, especially here in the United Shenanigans of America, most people are exhibiting narcissistic behavior. And most people in today's society lack empathy. And it's all by design. And some people have gravitated to it, and some people are engaged in it that don't even realize it. So I want to thank you for tuning in to the Network of Awareness along with the Golden Apple Podcast. If you want to listen to the Golden Apple Podcast, personal development podcast, go to any streaming platform. It's on there. Of course, if you want to check out Network of Awareness, we're on all streaming platforms as well. And stay tuned. This was the first installment, first episode of What is Narcissist? What is Narcissism, I should say. So let's exit out.
Thank you.
This concludes the Network of Awareness podcast. For more information on the Network of Awareness, please subscribe via email to our website, networkofawareness.com, and follow us on Spreaker.com or any other listening apps you use. For any questions about the NOA, email us at ORRA@networkofawareness.com. Thank you for listening to one of the fastest growing podcast shows on society and culture in America and abroad. When you live in the present, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.